Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Fraud in SMB Lending, It's Here and It's Ugly, presented by Aite Group Senior Analyst David O'Connell. I'm Siobhan Scanlon, and I'll be one of your Aite Group hosts for today's webinar. We'll be starting the webinar shortly, but first let me take care of a few housekeeping items. Today's session will be recorded, and a link to view the webinar on demand will be available to all current Aite Group clients of our fraud and AML and wholesale banking and payments practices. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit your questions using the questions feature located in the GoToWebinar toolbar to the right of your screen. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. David O'Connell is a senior analyst with Aite Group's wholesale banking team, where he's focused on lending. Mr. O'Connell's coverage of lending encompasses the small and mid-sized business market, commercial and industrial markets, fraud deterrence in lending, and the application of business intelligence to lending. Joining Mr. O'Connell today is Elizabeth Hughes McDonald, the new CEO of the Small Business Finance Exchange, a nonprofit trade association that advocates for the safe and secure growth of small business. Mrs. McDonald assumed this role in June 2019 after a long career in the banking industry. For more than 20 years, she worked for JP Morgan Chase and predecessor organizations in New York City. So without further ado, I'll now turn the mic over to David. Thank you again for joining us and enjoy today's webinar.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. I'm really excited to be talking to everyone about fraud today. One reason for that is I'm a former commercial banker of 14 years. And like many folks on the line, I just find fraud kind of fascinating. But more than just interesting, I want this webinar to be really helpful. One of my goals for this webinar for you folks today, because I know everybody had a really busy calendar today and a really long to-do list, one of my goals is for this webinar to enable you to understand what's going on with fraud, the magnitude of the problem, and it will enable you to advocate for the deterrence of fraud in your organization. The way I want to accomplish that, here's the agenda. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about how the survey came about, the survey that I'll be talking about with you today, the role of the Small Business Financial Exchange in that, the methodology, how we went about achieving our sought insights, the fraud vectors that are generally happening out there, and then most importantly, the findings from this study. And what are the implications for the industry in general and for your lending institutions in particular. And then because I've spoken to a few groups with this data set, I kind of have gotten a feel for where the industry is now headed at this point. So that